My phone buzzed on the hotel nightstand with a notification reading "Motion detected." I opened the feed, expecting a glitch, but saw my parents measuring my walls like they owned them. Then my mother laughed, telling my father to move all of Mason's stuff in because I would not make a scene. I did not scream. I simply turned off the screen, smiled, and set a trap. My name is Nora Miller, and I was sitting in a sterile hotel room in San Diego when the notification that ended my relationship with my parents lit up my phone screen. It was a standard alert from the security system I had installed 6 months ago, a simple banner that read, "Motion detected in living room." I stared at it for a moment, my thumb hovering over the glass. I was 3,000 miles away from my home in Richmond, Virginia. I was supposed to be focusing on a compliance seminar for Cedar and Slate Analytics, preparing for a presentation that could secure my promotion to senior consultant. My house should have been empty. The cleaners were not scheduled until Friday. I tapped the notification, expecting a glitch, maybe a shadow from a passing car or a spider crawling across the lens. The app loaded, the little buffering circle spinning for a second that felt like an hour. Before the live feed snapped into focus, it was not a spider, it was my mother, Linda, and right behind her, dragging a heavy stepladder across my hardwood floors without lifting the feet, was my father, Greg. I sat very still on the edge of the hotel bed. The air conditioning in the room hummed with a low, artificial drone, but suddenly the silence felt deafening. I turned the volume up on my phone, pressing the device closer to my ear. The microphone on the camera picked up the scrape of the ladder legs against the wood, a sound that made my teeth ache. They were not just walking through, they were not watering the plants I had not asked them to water. They were measuring. My father was holding a yellow tape measure, extending it across the width of the wall where I kept my bookshelf. He shouted a number to my mother, 12 feet and 4 inches. My mother nodded and scribbled something down on a notepad she was holding. She looked like a general surveying a battlefield she had already conquered. She pointed to my sofa, a vintage mid-century piece I had spent 3 years hunting down, and made a sweeping gesture with her hand that clearly meant get rid of it. I watched, paralyzed by a cold, creeping confusion. I had given them a spare key for emergencies, a burst pipe, a fire, a medical crisis. I had not given them a key so they could rearrange my furniture while I was on the other side of the country. Then I heard them speak, and the confusion evaporated, replaced by a sharp, icy clarity. My father retracted the tape measure with a loud snap. He looked at the wall where my framed prints hung. He said that Mason would need this wall for the green screen. He said the natural light in here was better than the basement. Mason, my brother, the 32-year-old visionary who had spent the last decade chasing get-rich-quick schemes and failing spectacularly at every single one of them. My mother walked into the frame, her back to the camera. She was wearing her coat, but she had taken her shoes off. That small detail, usually a sign of respect, felt like a violation. She was making herself comfortable. She pointed toward the hallway leading to my home office. She told my father that the office was the only room big enough for a king bed. She said my desk could go in the garage. She said Mason needed a proper space to rest if he was going to focus on his content creation. My office, the room where I worked 14 hours a day, the room where I kept my client files, my dual monitors, and the small collection of vinyl records that was the only hobby I allowed myself. They were discussing dismantling my livelihood to make room for Mason to sleep until noon. I almost pressed the microphone button. The icon was right there. A little blue microphone that would project my voice into the living room. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask them what the hell they thought they were doing. I wanted to tell them to get out of my house immediately. My finger hovered over the button, trembling slightly, but then my mother turned around. She looked straight at my father, a soft, indulgent smile on her face. It was the smile she reserved exclusively for Mason, or for plans that involved Mason. My father looked hesitant. He rubbed the back of his neck and asked if they should perhaps call me first. He asked if Nora might mind them moving her office into the garage. My mother laughed. It was a low, dismissive sound. She waved her hand in the air as if swatting away a fly. "Just move it all in," she said. Her voice was crystal clear through the tiny speakers of my phone. She told him to stop worrying. She said that I would not make a scene. I froze. My finger pulled back from the screen as if it had been burned. She will not make a scene. That was the sentence that changed everything. It was not a prediction. It was a strategy. It was a calculated assessment of my character that she was exploiting for profit. She was banking on my passivity. She was betting on the fact that I was the reasonable one, the stable one, the daughter who fixed things rather than broke them. She knew that if I came home and found Mason installed in my house, I would sigh and pinch the bridge of my nose, but I would not throw him out on the street. I never had before. Why would I start now? I watched for another minute. They moved with the efficiency of a crew that had done this before. My father started pushing my armchair toward the hallway. My mother was already peeling a strip of blue painter tape to mark where Mason's equipment would go. They were not visiting. They were occupying. This was an invasion disguised as a family favor. I closed the app. The screen went black. Reflecting my own face back at me, I looked pale. My eyes were wide, but I was not crying. The shock had bypassed sadness entirely and gone straight to a cold, hard rage. I sat there in the silence of the hotel room, the phone heavy in my hand. I asked myself a question that felt like a stone dropping into a well. When did I teach them this? When did I teach them that my boundaries were suggestions? When did I teach them that my home was a public resource for the Caldwell family failures? I thought about the times I had paid Mason's car insurance because he forgot. I thought about the time I covered his rent for 3 months because he was between opportunities. I thought about how I always swallowed my anger because we were family, and family helps each other. I realize now that I had not been helping. I had been training them. I had trained them to believe that I was a resource to be harvested, not a person to be respected. My phone buzzed again in my hand. A text message. It was from my mother. I stared at the notification. The timestamp was 1 minute ago. She must have sent it while standing in the middle of my living room, while plotting to evict my desk to the garage. The text read, "Remember to eat well. Do not work too hard. Have a fun trip. Love, Mom." I read it twice. The casual cruelty of it made my stomach turn. The lie was so effortless. She was playing the role of the caring mother digitally, while actively dismantling my life physically. She wanted me to have a fun trip. She wanted me to stay away. She wanted me to be happy and distracted, so that by the time I returned, the coup would be complete. If I came home in 2 days as planned, the locks might not be changed. But the emotional locks would be, Mason would be unpacked. He would be cooking in the kitchen. He would look pathetic and hopeful. My mother would say they just wanted to surprise me. She would say surely I could help him out for a few weeks. The trap would have sprung, and I would be the bad guy for trying to escape it. I stood up and walked to the window. San Diego looked beautiful and distant, the palm trees swaying in a breeze I could not feel. I looked at my suitcase sitting on the luggage rack. It was neatly packed. My suit for tomorrow was hanging in the closet. My return ticket was for Thursday evening. 2 days from now. 2 days was too long. In 2 days, my office would be in the garage. In 2 days, the narrative would be set. I did not scream. I did not throw the phone against the wall. I felt a strange, icy calm settle over me. It was the same feeling I got when I was analyzing a complex data set for a client, looking for the anomaly that explained the loss. I was no longer a daughter. I was an auditor, and I had just discovered a massive internal fraud. I unlocked my phone again. I did not open the camera app this time. I opened the airline app. The change fee to switch my flight to tonight was $650, the price of a last-minute red-eye ticket across the country a week ago. I would have agonized over that amount. I would have tried to find a cheaper option. Now, I did not even blink. I tapped the confirm button. The flight left in 4 hours. I would land in Richmond at 6 in the morning. I began to pack. I moved with mechanical precision. Toiletries in the bag. Charger coiling into the side pocket. Laptop sliding into its sleeve. As I packed, I made a decision. I would not call them. If I called them now, they would scatter. They would come up with an excuse. They would say they were just measuring for a gift. They would gaslight me. And then they would wait for a better opportunity. Or worse, they would guilt trip me over the phone, wearing me down before I even set foot on my own driveway. No, I needed them to commit. I needed them to finish setting up the stage. I needed evidence. I needed timing. I needed witnesses. I thought about the camera footage. It was recording to the cloud. Every word they said, every piece of furniture they moved, was being archived. That was good, but it was not enough. If it was just me against them, they would spin it. They would tell the extended family that I was hysterical, that I had misunderstood, that I was cruel to my struggling brother. I needed more than just a video. I needed a legal reality that they could not argue with. I zipped up my suitcase. The sound was sharp and final. I checked out of the hotel through the app. I walked to the elevator. My mind was racing, but not with panic. I was building a file. I was creating a timeline. I was drafting the mental list of people I needed to contact before I landed. I thought about the layout of my house, the way the front door opened directly into the living room, the way the driveway was visible from the street. If they were moving Mason in, there would be a truck, there would be boxes, there would be a spectacle. Mason loved a spectacle. He would probably be posting about it on social media. He wouldn't be able to help himself. He would want the world to know about his new studio. Good. Let him broadcast it. Let him create the paper trail for me. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors slid shut, cutting off the view of the quiet hotel hallway, I looked at my reflection in the polished metal doors. I did not look like the Nora Miller who had left Richmond 3 days ago. That Nora Miller was a pushover. That Nora Miller believed that love meant enduring disrespect. The woman in the elevator reflection looked tired. Yes, but she also looked dangerous. I pulled up the camera feed one last time as the elevator descended. My father was now holding a roll of blue painter tape. He was marking an X on the floor where my coffee table used to be. My mother was on her phone, likely ordering something for the new room using my Amazon account, which was logged in on the iPad I had left on the kitchen counter. I took a screenshot. Then I texted my boss. I told him a family emergency had come up, and I had to return to Richmond immediately. I told him I would handle the presentation remotely or send my notes to my colleague. It was a risk, but keeping my house was more important than one seminar. The elevator chimed at the lobby floor. I walked out, dragging my suitcase behind me. The wheels hummed on the marble floor. I was coming home, but I was not coming home to cook dinner or to listen to Mason's pitch for a new podcast network. I was coming home to close the door. My mother thought I would not make a scene. She was right. I was not going to make a scene. Scenes are messy and emotional and temporary. I was going to make a case, and when I was finished, there would be no confusion about whose name was on the deed and whose key still worked in the lock. I walked out into the warm California sun and hailed a cab. The air was sweet, but all I could smell was the dusty scent of the old boxes my parents were currently dragging out of their minivan and into my foyer. I checked my watch. It was 2 p.m. on the West Coast. That meant it was 5 p.m. in Richmond. They had the whole evening ahead of them. They would order pizza. They would laugh. They would feel smart and resourceful. Let them. I settled into the back of the taxi and gave the driver the airport terminal. As we pulled away, I opened a new note on my phone. I typed 3 words at the top of the blank screen. The Caldwell pattern. It was time to document everything, not as a daughter, but as the owner of the property they were currently trespassing on. I took a deep breath, watching the palm trees blur past the window. I was done being the safety net. It was time to see if they could fly without me, or more accurately, it was time to see how hard they would hit the ground when the net was pulled away, to the outside world, and certainly to the Caldwell family. I was simply Nora, the steady one, the solid one, the one who did not need worrying about. I was the architectural column that held up the roof so everyone else could dance around underneath it without fear of the sky falling down. I had been playing this role since I was 10 years old. While my younger brother Mason was allowed to be chaotic, loud, and demanding of attention, I was praised for being low maintenance. My parents, Greg and Linda, called me independent. They called me focused. They told their friends at dinner parties that Nora was a rock. usually right before they launched into a 20-minute monologue about whatever new crisis Mason was currently navigating. I was 35 years old. I had built a career in data compliance from the ground up. I had paid off my student loans 3 years early. I had purchased my home in Richmond with a 20% down payment that I saved by working 60-hour weeks and skipping vacations. I had never asked my parents for a cent since the day I graduated college. They loved that about me. They loved that I required zero investment, but love is a currency, and in the Caldwell household, they spent all of it on Mason. Mason was 32, but in the emotional ecosystem of our family, he was perpetually 19. He was the golden child who had never quite managed to shine, the genius who was always one bad break away from greatness. He was the one who needed more time. He needed to find himself. He needed to explore his creative voice. I sat in the back of the taxi, watching the San Diego skyline retreat, and the memories of the last 5 years washed over me like a cold tide. I thought about the concept of temporary help. That was the phrase my mother always used. It was always just a temporary situation. It started small. 5 years ago, Mason decided he was going to be a high-end wedding photographer. He needed a specific camera body and 2 lenses. He did not have the $4,000 required. My father called me on a Tuesday night. He did not ask me how my job was going. He asked me if I could float Mason the money just until he booked his first 2 gigs. He said it was an investment in my brother's future. I wrote the check. 6 months later, the photography business folded because Mason got into an argument with a bride and refused to edit her photos. He sold the camera for half its value to pay a speeding ticket and buy a new gaming console. I never saw my $4,000 again. When I asked about it at Thanksgiving, my mother touched my arm and gave me a look of deep, sorrowful disappointment. She told me that Mason was really hurting right now, and that bringing up money was kicking him when he was down. That was the pattern. There was the time I paid his rent for 3 months because he had quit his job at a car dealership. He claimed the manager was stifling his leadership potential. The rent was $1,800 a month. I paid it directly to the landlord because I knew if I gave the cash to Mason, he would spend it on branded merchandise for his personal brand. There was the car insurance, the dental bill, the time he needed a new laptop because his old one was too slow to render the videos he was going to make for a YouTube channel that never launched. I kept doing it because I had been conditioned to believe that this was what love looked like. I thought that family meant carrying the burden for those who were not strong enough to carry it themselves. I thought that my ability to write checks was my way of earning my place at the table. If I could not be the charismatic, beloved son, I would be the indispensable, solvent daughter. But there was a darker side to my compliance. Every time I hesitated, every time I asked to see a business plan or a repayment schedule, my mother would play her trump card. She would look at me with watery eyes and say that I was lucky. She would tell me that I did not understand how hard it was for Mason. She would say that things came easily to me. She would say that I had a natural head for numbers and structure, whereas Mason was an artist, a dreamer, a sensitive soul who felt the world more intensely than I did. She framed my stability as a privilege I had been gifted, rather than a discipline I had forged. She framed his incompetence as a tragic affliction, like a chronic illness that required constant care. "You are luckier than him," she would say. "You do not know what that kind of pressure feels like." I resented that word. Lucky. There was no luck in waking up at 5 in the morning to study for certification exams. There was no luck in driving a 10-year-old sedan so I could maximize my 401k contributions. There was no luck in choosing to be responsible when I wanted to be reckless. Mason was not unlucky. He was simply unwilling to be bored. He was allergic to the mundane, grinding effort that success actually required. But he was brilliant at one thing. He was a master of the narrative. Mason could spin a failure into a tragedy so compelling that you felt like a monster for not handing him your wallet. He did not just get fired. He was the victim of corporate restructuring that targeted creative thinkers. He did not just miss a bill payment. The banking system was rigged against freelancers. He performed his life like a one-man show, and my parents were his most devoted audience. They applauded his potential while I subsidized his reality, and now that performance had moved into my living room. My house in Richmond was not just an asset, it was the physical manifestation of my autonomy. I had bought it 3 years ago. It was a classic brick colonial, set back from the road, with old oak trees in the yard. It was quiet. That was the most expensive feature I had paid for. The silence. Growing up, our house was always filled with the noise of Mason's latest obsession: drums, electric guitars, video games at maximum volume, my parents shouting, Mason shouting back. I had lived my entire childhood with headphones on, trying to carve out a cubic foot of peace in a war zone. When I bought the Richmond house, I walked through the empty rooms and felt my shoulders drop for the first time in decades. I filled it slowly. I did not buy furniture to impress anyone. I bought things that felt solid. I bought heavy bookcases. I bought a dining table made of reclaimed wood. But the heart of the house was the small room at the back of the first floor. The real estate listing had called it a sunroom, but I called it the music room. It was my sanctuary. I had soundproofed the walls myself, adding acoustic panels that blended in with the decor. In that room, I kept my collection of vinyl records, jazz, classical, ambient, nothing with lyrics that demanded attention. I had a vintage turntable and a comfortable leather armchair that faced the window looking out over the garden. There was a small upright piano in the corner that I played badly but passionately when no one was around to hear. The music room was the only place in the world where I did not have to be Nora the consultant or Nora the daughter. It was where I could just be. It was the inside of my head, externalized, and that was why the image on my phone screen had felt like a physical assault. When I saw my father measuring the wall in the living room, I was angry. But when I heard them talking about the music room, talking about turning it into a storage space for Mason's gear because it had climate control, I felt a violation that went deeper than property rights. They were not just moving furniture, they were dismantling my sanctuary. They were looking at the one space I had created solely for my own peace and deciding that it would serve better as a closet for Mason's ego. They walked through my home with the confidence of people who knew there would be no consequences. They touched my things. They judged my layout. They made executive decisions about my space as if I were a tenant they were preparing to evict. I sat in the taxi, my hand gripping the handle of my suitcase until my knuckles turned white. I forced myself to confront the most painful truth of all. They did not do this because they hated me. They did this because they did not respect me. And they did not respect me because I had never given them a reason to fear me. They were sure I would submit. They were banking on it. They knew the script. I would come home. I would see Mason settled in. I would be shocked. My mother would cry and talk about family unity. My father would look weary and ask me to be the bigger person. Mason would look at his shoes and mumble about how he just needed a few months to get back on his feet. And in the past, the old Nora would have sighed. She would have swallowed the scream rising in her throat. She would have said, "Okay, just for a little while." She would have absorbed the inconvenience to keep the peace. My parents were not evil masterminds. They were just people who had found a path of least resistance, and that path ran right over my spine. They were doing this because it was easier to displace me than it was to force Mason to grow up. I was the collateral damage in their lifelong project of enabling their son. I closed my eyes and pictured the living room again. I pictured my mother's smile when she said I would not make a scene. She was right about the history, but she was wrong about the future. The Nora who paid the rent was gone. The Nora who smiled through the insults was gone. The woman sitting in this taxi was someone else entirely. I had spent my life building a fortress of stability. I had the deeds. I had the bank accounts. I had the credit score. I had the receipts. For years, I had treated these things as boring administrative details. Now, I realized they were weapons. My parents thought they were moving Mason into a house. They did not realize they were walking into a courtroom. I took my phone out again. I did not look at the camera feed this time. I opened my banking app. I navigated to the search bar and typed in the name Mason. The list of transactions populated the screen. It was a long scroll of red numbers, transfers, Venmo payments, Zelle transactions, $200 here, $500 there. $1,000 for the emergency that turned out to be a weekend trip to Vegas. I looked at the total. It was a number that could have paid off a significant portion of a mortgage. It was the price of a luxury car. It was the cost of my own stupidity. I took a screenshot. Then I opened my email. I searched for the keywords. Mason and loan. I found an email from 3 years ago. It was from my father. The subject line was favor. In the body of the email, he had asked if I would co-sign a personal loan for Mason to consolidate his credit card debt. I had refused that time. It was the one boundary I had managed to hold. But as I scrolled through my inbox, I found something else. A notification from a credit monitoring service that I had archived without reading 2 weeks ago. I usually ignored them as spam. Assuming my credit was frozen, I opened the archived email. New inquiry detected. It read, the date was 14 days ago. The inquiry was from a local lending institution in Richmond. I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck. I had not applied for any credit in 2 years. I tapped on the details. The inquiry was for a home equity line of credit, a HELOC, on my address. My breath caught in my throat. A HELOC required the owner's signature. It required notarization. It required me. My parents had not just broken in to move furniture. They were not just planning to let Mason crash on the couch. They were leveraging my asset. The pieces clicked together with the terrifying precision of a steel trap. The rush to move him in while I was gone. The comment about Mason needing the office. The measuring. They were not just setting up a bedroom. They were establishing residency. They were creating a physical reality to match a paper lie. If Mason was living there, if his things were there, if the neighbors saw him there, it added a layer of legitimacy to whatever fraud they were attempting. I felt a wave of nausea, followed immediately by a surge of adrenaline so potent it made my hands shake. This was no longer a family dispute. This was a crime. I looked out the window. The airport terminals were coming into view. My mother thought I was lucky. She thought I did not understand pressure. She was about to find out that I understood pressure very well. I worked in compliance. My entire career was built on finding the cracks in the system, the hidden liabilities, the fraudulent signatures, and the bad actors who thought they were smarter than the audit. I was not going to make a scene. I was going to conduct an audit, and I was going to tear their little scheme down to the studs. "Driver," I said, my voice sounding surprisingly steady in the quiet cab. "Can you drop me at the departures level? I have a flight to catch." I was going home to defend my music room. I was going home to defend my silence. And God help anyone who was standing inside my walls when I got there. The cabin lights dimmed as the plane reached cruising altitude, casting the passengers in a low, artificial twilight. I did not lean back. I did not close my eyes. I pulled my tray table down and opened my laptop. The screen was the only bright thing in my row, a rectangle of white light that felt like an interrogation lamp. I paid the $25 for the in-flight Wi-Fi without hesitation. It was slow, but it was functional. I needed to be connected. I needed to be online. I created a new folder on my desktop. I did not name it Family or Mason or Home. I named it Caldwell Pattern. I was done reacting. I was done feeling hurt. Hurt was a useless emotion that clouded judgment. I was shifting into the mode I used when a client hired me to find out why their internal audits were failing. I was looking for the bleed. I was looking for the systemic failure. I logged into my primary bank account. I downloaded the transaction history for the last 5 years and imported it into a spreadsheet. The screen filled with rows and columns of data. To anyone else, it would look like a boring list of expenses. To me, it was a crime scene. I applied a filter for transfers to family members. The list shrank, but it was still long, too long. I started summing the totals. There were the birthday gifts, which was normal. There were the Christmas checks, also normal. But then there was the gray zone, the zone I had allowed to exist because it was easier to pay than to argue. $300 for a mechanic bill in 2021, $500 for a suit for a job interview in 2022, $250 for emergency dental work, $600 for a deposit on an apartment he never moved into. I looked at the dates. Then, I opened a second tab in my browser and navigated to the Wayback Machine and Instagram. I started cross-referencing. The $300 for the mechanic on May 12th. On May 14th, Mason had posted a photo of a new limited edition sneaker drop. The caption read, "Finally copped the grails. The price of those sneakers at retail was exactly $300. The $500 for the interview suit, there was no photo of a suit." But that same week, he had checked into a VIP table at a club in downtown Richmond. The dental work. That one lined up perfectly with the release date of a new high-end gaming monitor he had bragged about on Twitter. I felt a cold tightness in my chest. It was not surprise. It was the sickening sensation of having your intelligence insulted. I had known, deep down, that he was bad with money. I had not realized he was laundering my compassion into consumer goods. I highlighted the column and looked at the sum at the bottom right of the screen. $42,850. That was the total over 5 years. I stared at the number. That was a down payment on a rental property. That was a master's degree. That was a luxury car. That was my retirement savings. I had not just been helping him, I had been funding a lifestyle he could not afford, and my parents had brokered every single transaction. Every request had come with a preamble from my mother about how hard he was trying. I closed the spreadsheet. The money was gone. I could not get it back, but the pattern was established. Mason asked. The parents guilted. Nora paid. Mason consumed. Now, the pattern was escalating. I went back to my email. I searched for the term change of address. I found nothing in my primary inbox. I checked the spam folder. Nothing. Then I checked the trash. There it was. A notification from the United States Postal Service. Official confirmation of change of address. It was dated 3 weeks ago. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had missed it. I must have been in a meeting. Saw the notification on my phone. Swiped it away thinking it was junk mail or a phishing attempt, and never looked back. I opened the email. It confirmed that mail for my address in Richmond was being temporarily forwarded to a P.O. box in a strip mall 3 miles away. Why would they divert my mail if they just wanted to move Mason in? They did not need my mail. They just needed the key. You divert mail when you are hiding something. You divert mail when you are expecting letters that the homeowner should not see. Letters from lenders. Letters from the city. Letters about liens. I thought back to the credit inquiry notification I had seen in the taxi. The HELOC. A home equity line of credit. I pulled out my phone. It was 9 at night on the West Coast, which meant it was midnight in Richmond. The local bank branch would be closed. But I banked with a large national chain for my mortgage. They had a 24-hour fraud line. I dialed the number. I put in my earbuds. The hold music played for 2 minutes. I stared at the seat back in front of me. The plastic tray table latch was slightly broken. I focused on it to keep my hands steady. A voice came on the line. Agent listening. I gave him my name, my social security number, and my verbal password. I asked him if there were any pending applications on my account. He typed for a moment. I could hear the keys clicking. He told me he saw a pending application for a home equity line of credit initiated 14 days ago. I asked him the status of the application. He hesitated. He said it was currently in the final underwriting stage. I asked him if the application was signed. He said yes. It had been signed electronically via DocuSign. I felt the blood drain from my face. I had not signed anything. I asked him what email address was associated with the DocuSign envelope. He said he could not give me the full email address for security reasons, but it started with the letter M and ended with the domain gmail.com. Mason. I took a deep breath. I asked him one last question. I asked if the loan had been funded yet. He said no. He said there was a flag on the file. I asked what the flag was. He said there was a discrepancy with the signature verification. The system had flagged the signature as a potential duplicate of a previous document on file, rather than a fresh, wet signature. He said they were waiting for a notarized affidavit of occupancy and a fresh signature sample before they could release the funds. I thanked him. I did not tell him it was fraud. Not yet. I hung up. I sat in the dark cabin, the hum of the engines vibrating through the floor. Signature verification. Duplicate signature. The memory hit me like a physical blow. 3 months ago, my father had called me. He was frantic. He said he was trying to switch Mason onto a new car insurance plan to save money, but because Mason had used my address as his permanent residence for the vehicle registration. They needed the homeowner to sign a waiver acknowledging the vehicle was parked on the property. It had sounded so boring, so administrative. My father had said their scanner was broken. He asked if I could just email him a high-resolution scan of my signature on a white background so he could paste it into the PDF and submit it before the deadline at 5 o'clock. I had been busy. I was in a client workshop. I did not have time to read the fine print. I trusted my father. I had grabbed a piece of paper, signed my name in thick black ink, scanned it with my phone app, and emailed it to him. I checked my sent folder. There it was. Subject signature for Dad. Attached Nora Sig, PNG. They had not used it for insurance. They had kept the file. They had cropped it, and Mason, with his rudimentary Photoshop skills, had pasted my signature onto a loan application for $100,000 against the equity of my house. The mail diversion was to hide the physical confirmation letters. The move-in was to satisfy the occupancy requirement. HELOCs often require the borrower to occupy the residence. If the bank sent an appraiser or a notary to verify who lived there, they needed Mason to open the door. They needed the house to look like he belonged there. They were stealing my house from the inside out. And the worst part was the timing. They waited until I was on the other side of the country. They waited until I was distracted. They were not just freeloaders. They were felons. I looked at the folder on my desktop. Caldwell pattern. I had enough to stop them right now. I could call the bank back, declare fraud, and have the account locked. I could call the police and have them waiting at the door. But if I did that, they would deny it. My father would say it was a misunderstanding. He would say he thought he had my verbal permission. He would say Mason made a mistake with the paperwork. My mother would cry and say I was trying to send my own brother to jail over a clerical error. They would gaslight me until I doubted my own reality. They would escape the consequences, and 6 months from now, they would try something else. No, I needed them to hang themselves. I needed the bank to catch them in the act. I needed the notary to be there. I needed the police to walk in not on a domestic dispute, but on an active financial crime in progress. I needed to let them think they had won. I opened a new document in the folder. I titled it, The Trap. I began to type a list of what I needed to do the moment I landed. 1. Do not go to the house immediately. 2. Call Simone Parker. I needed a lawyer who understood civil litigation and restraining orders. Simone was the best. 3. Contact a locksmith. I needed the locks changed the second the show was over. 4. Contact the bank fraud department, but not to cancel, to coordinate. I needed to create a situation where they had to produce the homeowner. I remembered the stack of papers I kept in my home office. Old rental agreements from when I had considered getting a roommate years ago. I had left them on the desk. If I played this right, I could trick them into showing their hand. I closed my eyes, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. The sadness was gone. The betrayal had cauterized the wound. My parents wanted to treat my life like a business transaction. Fine. I would give them the most professional, ruthless business transaction of their lives. I looked at the flight map on the screen. We were crossing over Texas. 3 more hours until we began our descent into Virginia. I typed one last note into the document. Let them sign. If they wanted to play the role of the owners, I would let them sign the papers. I would let them commit the forgery in front of a witness. I would let them dig the hole so deep that not even my mother's tears could float them out of it. I closed the laptop. The darkness of the cabin felt protective now. I was a predator waiting in the tall grass. They thought I was the prey. They thought I was the nice, stable, boring daughter who would pay the bill and look away. They had no idea who was coming for them. I landed in Richmond at 6:45 in the morning. The sky was a bruised purple, transitioning into a pale, sickly gray. It was the kind of humidity that stuck your shirt to your back the moment you stepped outside. But I did not feel the heat. I felt cold. My blood felt like ice water circulating through a machine. I did not go home. That was the most important part of the plan. I picked up a rental car, a nondescript silver sedan that looked nothing like the black SUV my family knew I drove. I needed to be invisible until I chose to be seen. I drove to a 24-hour diner near the airport, ordered a black coffee, and opened my laptop. It was time to bring in the professionals. I dialed Simone Parker. Simone and I had gone to college together. While I had drifted into the structured world of data compliance, Simone had gone into civil litigation. She was a shark in a tailored suit, the kind of lawyer who spoke softly and carried a very large briefcase full of subpoenas. It was 4 a.m. her time on the West Coast, but I knew she would answer. Simone was an insomniac who did her best work before dawn. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice was raspy but alert. I told her everything. I did not cry. I did not embellish. I laid out the facts like I was presenting a quarterly report: the unauthorized entry, the measuring, the mail diversion, the credit inquiry, the forged signature. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, Simone spoke. She told me that I had 2 choices. I could go there now, scream at them, kick them out, and change the locks. That would be the emotional choice. It would feel good for about an hour, but then the gaslighting would start. They would claim tenancy rights. They would claim I gave verbal permission. They would drag this out in small claims court or family court for months, and in the meantime, my credit would be ruined and my peace of mind would be shredded. Or, she said, I could do it the hard way, the permanent way. I told her I wanted the permanent way. I told her I did not want revenge. I wanted a binding resolution. I wanted paper walls that they could not walk through. Simone began to give me a list. She told me that in the eyes of the law, if it is not documented, it did not happen. She told me to treat my home like a crime scene that had not yet been processed. First, she said, I needed an asset inventory. She told me to find every photo I had of the house from before this week. I needed to prove the condition of the floors, the walls, and the furniture. If they scratched the hardwood dragging that ladder, that was property damage. If they put a hole in the wall for a television mount, that was vandalism. Second, she said, I needed to secure the timeline. I opened my cloud storage. I created a subfolder named Timestamped Entry. I began to pull the clips from the security camera. Clip 1, Tuesday, 5:14 in the afternoon. Entry gained. Clip 2, Tuesday, 5:20 in the afternoon. Intent to alter property expressed. Clip 3, Tuesday, 5:35. Conspiracy to commit fraud, the discussion about the mail. I renamed every file with the exact date and time. Simone told me this was crucial for the trespass notice. We needed to prove that their presence was not a visit, but an occupation that exceeded any reasonable scope of a guest. Then, Simone gave me the most important piece of advice. She told me not to interrupt them, not yet. She explained that right now. They were in the planning phase. If I stopped them now, they could claim it was all hypothetical. They could say they were just joking, just looking, just talking. I needed them to execute. I needed them to take a physical step that could not be walked back. I needed them to damage something, sign something, or move something significant. I needed to give them enough rope. I hung up with Simone and looked at my watch. It was 8 o'clock in the morning. The business day was starting. I searched for a locksmith in Richmond. I found a company with 5 stars and a reputation for emergency evictions. I called them. I spoke to a dispatcher. I told her I needed a whole house re-key. Front door, back door, garage side door. I told her I needed it done today, but not until 6 in the evening. I asked her if they could provide an itemized invoice that listed the time of service and the reason for the call. I told her to list the reason as unauthorized occupant removal. She paused, then said they could do that. She took my credit card number. I told her to park down the street and wait for my text before pulling into the driveway. I wanted the element of surprise. Next, I needed eyes on the ground. I thought of Ruth McKenna. Ruth lived in the house to the left of mine. She was a retired school principal with a sharp mind and a profound intolerance for nonsense. We had a good relationship. I watered her hydrangeas when she visited her grandkids. She collected my packages when I was traveling. I sent her a text message. I wrote, "Good morning. Ruth, I am currently in town but not at the house. I suspect there is some unauthorized activity going on at my property. I am handling it. but I need a favor. If you see a moving truck, or a large gathering of people, or if you see anyone moving furniture in, could you please take a photo? Do not approach them, just document it, Ruth replied 3 minutes later. She wrote, I saw a van there yesterday. I thought you were home early. They were carrying in large boxes. I will keep my blinds open. You say the word, and I will call the police. I type back, not yet. I need them to finish moving in. Trust me. I put the phone down. I felt a strange sense of detachment, like I was moving pieces on a chessboard. Now for the next layer, the homeowners association. I had a complicated relationship with my HOA. They were strict about trash cans and lawn height, but today, their strictness was my greatest ally. I opened my email app. I drafted a message to the HOA board. Subject: potential violation of community bylaws. Commercial activity. I wrote that I had reason to believe my property was being used for unauthorized commercial purposes, specifically a film production and recording studio, which violated the residential zoning clause of our neighborhood agreement. I wrote that I was taking steps to rectify it, but I wanted to put it on record that I, the homeowner, had not authorized this business to operate. I did not hit send yet. I saved it as a draft. I would send it the moment I saw the first camera crew arrive. That way, when the fines came, they would be issued to the occupants, and I would have proof that I had reported the violation myself. I sat back in the booth and took a sip of my cold coffee. I had the law, I had the locksmith, I had the witness, I had the HOA, but I needed one more thing. I needed the smoking gun that tied the physical house to the financial fraud. I closed my eyes and visualized my home office. I tried to remember the state of my desk before I left. I had been cleaning out my drawers a week ago. I had found a folder of old real estate documents from when I bought the house. Inside that folder, there were a few blank templates I had printed out years ago when I toyed with the idea of getting a roommate to help with the mortgage. Standard, generic room lease agreements. I had left that folder on the corner of my desk. I remembered seeing it there when I grabbed my passport. If my parents were moving Mason into the office, they would clear that desk. They would find that folder. And Mason was greedy, but he was also desperate for legitimacy. He needed to prove to the bank that he lived there. He needed a utility bill, or a driver license, or a lease. He couldn't get a utility bill in his name that quickly. He couldn't change his license overnight, but a lease. If he found a blank lease agreement sitting right there on the desk, it would look like a gift from the universe. It would look like the perfect solution. All he had to do was fill in his name, fill in a fake rental amount to show income or stability, and then sign my name at the bottom. He had already forged my signature digitally. Would he do it physically? I bet everything I had that he would. If he signed that lease, he was not just a squatter, he was a forger. He was creating a fraudulent legal document to defraud a bank. And if I could get my hands on that piece of paper, or a photo of it, I would have him. It was a trap, a silent paper trap, waiting on a mahogany desk. I checked the time. It was 10 o'clock. I decided to drive by the house. I drove the rental car to my neighborhood. I did not turn down my street. I drove down the parallel street, parking the car 2 blocks away in a spot where it would blend in with the other sedans. I walked the rest of the way, sticking to the opposite side of the road, wearing large sunglasses and a baseball cap. I approached my house from the side, using the cover of Ruth's tall hedges. I could see the driveway. My father's minivan was backed up to the garage door. The trunk was open. I watched as my father and Mason lifted a large gray sofa out of the back. It was not my sofa. It was a cheap, velvet thing that looked like it belonged in a college dorm. They were struggling with it. My father looked red in the face. Mason was laughing, directing him, not lifting his fair share of the weight. "Careful with the legs," Mason shouted. I could hear him clearly. They pushed the sofa into my garage, presumably to move it into the space that used to be my office. Then I saw my mother. She came out of the front door. She was holding a wreath, a dried floral wreath that I had hung on the door for autumn. She walked to the trash can at the curb and threw it inside. Then she reached into a bag and pulled out a new decoration, a neon sign, a small, battery-operated sign that read, "Vibes." She hung it on my front door. I stood behind the hedge. my fingernails digging into my palms. They were erasing me. They were not just moving in. They were rebranding. They were taking the identity of the house and rewriting it to fit Mason's juvenile aesthetic. I wanted to run across the lawn. I wanted to tear that sign down and smash it on the driveway. I wanted to scream until the windows rattled. But I remembered Simone's voice. Give them rope. If I stopped them now, they would say they were just decorating. They would say I was overreacting to a sign. I needed them to go further. I needed them to feel so comfortable, so secure, so entitled, that they would sit down at my desk and sign that lease. I took a photo of the neon sign with my phone, zooming in to catch my mother's face as she adjusted it. Then I turned around and walked away. I went back to the rental car. I sat in the driver's seat and locked the doors. I had 8 hours until the locksmith arrived. 8 hours to wait. I opened the Caldwell pattern folder again. I started a new document titled The Confrontation. I began to script what I would say. I needed to be precise. No emotion, no tears, just facts. I am the sole owner of this property. You do not have a lease. You are trespassing. You have committed fraud. You have 1 hour to vacate before I press charges. I rehearsed the lines in the rearview mirror. My eyes looked hard. The exhaustion was there, hanging in purple crescents under my lashes. But the fire behind them was gone. It had been replaced by something colder. I was not a daughter anymore. I was a landlord. I was a victim of identity theft. I was a force of nature that was about to make landfall. I waited. The sun climbed higher in the sky, heating up the metal of the car. I watched the digital clock on the dashboard tick away the minutes. Tick, tick, tick. Every minute they spent in that house. They were digging their hole deeper. Every item they moved, every nail they hammered, every paper they signed was another shovel of dirt. I was just waiting for them to finish the grave so I could push them in. I sat in the stifling heat of the rental car. My phone propped up on the steering wheel like a miniature cinema screen. The air conditioning was off to save gas, but I was sweating for a different reason. I was watching a live broadcast of my own erasure. The camera feed on my phone was crisp, high definition, and utterly heartless. It showed my living room, but it was rapidly ceasing to be mine. Mason had arrived. He did not walk in like a guest. He did not walk in like a brother. He walked in like a CEO taking over a bankrupt startup. He was wearing a fresh graphic tee and expensive cargo pants, carrying a massive ring light over one shoulder like a bazooka. Under his other arm, he held a tripod. He set the equipment down in the center of the room, right on top of my Persian rug. He spent a solid 5 minutes adjusting the height of the tripod, checking the angles, preening in the reflection of the dark window. He looked energized. He looked important. He looked like a man who had finally found the venue worthy of his talent. He pulled out his phone. I watched on the security feed as he held it up, panning across the room, making sure to catch the high ceilings and the architectural details I had fallen in love with 3 years ago. I quickly switched apps on my own phone. Opening Instagram, I navigated to his profile. The story circle around his profile picture was already glowing with a fresh gradient of pink and orange. I tapped it. The video loaded. It was a boomerang of him spinning around in my living room, arms wide, a grin plastered on his face. The caption was written in bold, white block letters, big change, new space, new era. He had added a sticker that said, grind mode. He did not tag the location, but anyone who knew me would recognize the painting in the background. Anyone who knew him would assume he had finally made it big. He was claiming the aesthetic of my success as the backdrop for his hustle. I switched back to the security feed. The anger was a physical weight in my gut, heavy and cold. Behind Mason, the background actors were hard at work. My father was bent double, heaving a stack of my books into a cardboard box. These were not paperback novels. These were my reference books, my art books, heavy hardcovers I had collected since grad school. He was tossing them in with the careless disregard one might show to old magazines. He sealed the box with tape. The ripping sound distorted but audible through the camera microphone. He lifted it, his face turning red with exertion, and marched it toward the garage door. My mother stood in the middle of the room. She was the director. She was pointing at my armchair, the one I read in every Sunday morning, and making a chopping motion with her hand. "Move it," she said. I heard her voice clearly. "It clashes with the lighting. Put it in the shed if it does not fit in the garage." The shed. The damp, uninsulated shed where I kept the lawnmower. She was relegating my furniture to the elements to make room for Mason's ring light. But they were not alone. That was the detail that made my grip tighten on the steering wheel until the leather creaked. There were strangers in my house. 2 men I did not recognize were hauling in black equipment cases. They looked like friends of Mason. Guys in their early 20s with backward caps and a loose, loping walk. They were laughing, treating my hallway like a backstage corridor. One of them opened my refrigerator, and took out a can of sparkling water. He cracked it open and took a sip, then left it on the coasterless wooden side table. And then there was the girl. She was blonde, slight, dressed in a business casual blouse that looked wrinkled, as if she had been wearing it for too long. She stood near the kitchen island, clutching a clipboard to her chest. She looked exhausted. She was not laughing. She was looking around the room with a mixture of awe and anxiety. I zoomed in on the feed. I did not know her. She was not a cousin. She was not one of Mason's usual rotation of girlfriends. She looked like someone who had a job to do. She was organizing papers on the counter, setting up a laptop. "Who are you?" I whispered to the empty car. "Why are you in my kitchen?" My phone buzzed with a text message. It was Ruth McKenna. I swiped down to read it. Ruth wrote, "They have been at it for an hour. A white van is parked in the driveway, blocking the sidewalk. I see men carrying black cases. It looks like a production crew." "Should I call the non-emergency line about the parking?" I typed back quickly. "No. Let them park. Let them get comfortable. Keep taking pictures." I needed the circus to be fully assembled before I pulled the tent down. I put my earbuds in. I needed to hear them. The visual was damning, but the audio was where the intent lived. I scrolled back on the timeline to a few minutes prior. When my father and mother were standing alone near the fireplace, I turned the volume up to maximum. My father was wiping sweat from his forehead. He looked nervous. He kept glancing at the front door. "Linda," he said. His voice was low. "Are you sure about the timing? What if she checks the cameras?" My mother was arranging a vase of flowers. My flowers on the mantel to frame the shot for Mason. She did not even look up. "She is in San Diego." "Greg," she said. "She is busy. She never checks the house when she is working. She trusts us." My father shifted his weight. "I just feel bad moving her things without asking. Maybe we should have called." My mother stopped adjusting the flowers. She turned to him, and her face was a mask of patronizing patience. "We are doing her a favor," she said. "The house is too big for her. She is lonely here. Having Mason here will be good for her safety. Besides, we are not stealing it. We are just repurposing the space." My father sighed. "I know. But when she comes back—" My mother laughed. It was that soft, terrifying chuckle I had heard in the hotel room. "Stop worrying," she said. "She is harmless. She is gentle. She will puff up for a minute, and then she will see how happy Mason is, and she will let it go. She always does." Harmless. The word hung in the air of the car, vibrating in my ears. They did not see me as a daughter. They did not see me as a woman who had clawed her way up the corporate ladder in a male-dominated field. They saw me as a creature without teeth, a resource to be mined, a doormat that breathed. They were not afraid of me. They were banking on my cowardice. They equated my silence with weakness and my generosity with stupidity. My father nodded, seemingly reassured. "Okay, let us just get it done fast. I want the studio set up before she gets back on Friday. If it looks professional, she will have a harder time saying no." Friday. They still thought I was coming back on Friday. They thought they had 48 hours to entrench themselves. They had no idea I was parked 3 streets away. I watched as Mason walked over to the blonde girl. He put an arm around her shoulder, squeezing her in a way that looked possessive rather than affectionate. He pointed to the papers on the clipboard. "Is the paperwork ready?" "Kara," he asked. "Kara, that was her name." She nodded, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Almost," she said. I just need to verify the square footage for the insurance rider on the equipment, and the bank needs the signed occupancy affidavit by tomorrow morning if you want the funds released by the weekend. Mason grinned. He kissed her on the temple. You are the best. Do not worry about the affidavit. I will handle the signature. My stomach dropped. There it was. The confirmation. He was going to sign. He was going to forge my name on a legal affidavit to release funds from a line of credit taken out on my equity, and this girl, Kara, was facilitating it. She might be innocent, she might be duped, or she might be an accomplice, but she was the mechanism. I switched apps and dialed Simone. She answered on the first ring. I told her what I just heard. I told her about Kara. I told her about the affidavit. Simone's voice was sharp steel. Listen to me. Nora, she said, this is the pivot point. If he signs that affidavit, it is federal bank fraud. It is identity theft. It is not a family squabble anymore. I know. I said, you cannot go in yet. Simone warned, if you go in now, he might not sign it. He might claim he was just looking at the papers. You need to wait until the pen touches the paper. You need the act to be consummated. I watched the screen. Mason was laughing at something one of his friends said. He looked so comfortable. He looked like the king of the castle. When I asked Simone, when do I go in? Simone paused. When is he planning to broadcast? I checked Instagram again. Mason had posted a countdown sticker on his story. The text read, House Tour Big Announcement Live. The timer was counting down. 30 minutes. He was going to do a live reveal. He wanted an audience. He wanted witnesses to his triumph. 30 minutes. I told Simone, perfect, she said. Let him start. Let him get the camera rolling. Let him introduce the space as his own. Let him put it on the public record. And then, you walk in. I hung up. I sat in the car and watched the countdown. 29 minutes. I watched them move my life out of the frame. My favorite throw blanket was tossed into a corner. My framed degree was taken off the wall and replaced with a neon sign that buzzed with electric blue light. My mother was bringing out snacks. She was playing hostess in a house she did not pay for. She was serving drinks to the people who were helping her son rob me. I felt a strange transformation taking place. The hurt was evaporating. The shock was gone. What was left was a cold, high-resolution clarity. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I did not look harmless. I did not look gentle. I looked like someone who was about to burn the theater down with the actors still on stage. I checked the folder on the passenger seat. I had the deed. I had the printouts of the transfers. I had the time-stamped photos. I started the car engine. The vibration felt good. It felt like potential energy waiting to be released. 15 minutes. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. I drove slowly, circling the neighborhood like a shark patrolling the reef. I visualized the entry. I would not knock. I would not ring the doorbell. It was my house. I would use my key. I would walk in. I would not shout. I would not cry. I would be the compliance officer walking into a failed audit. 10 minutes. I saw the notification pop up on my phone. Mason is live. I pulled over 1 block away. I opened the stream. There he was. My brother. Standing in the center of my living room. The ring light reflecting in his eyes. A smile of absolute, unearned confidence on his face. What is up? Guys, he shouted into the phone. Welcome to the new HQ. We have been working hard to make this happen, and I am so hyped to show you the new studio. The comments were scrolling up the side of the screen. Congrats, bro. Huge moves, sick setup. My mother walked into the frame behind him, waving shyly. And shout out to the team, Mason said, gesturing to the room. We are making big things happen here. I put the phone in my pocket. It was time. I drove the final block. I turned the corner onto my street. The driveway was blocked by the van. Just as Ruth had said, I pulled my rental car right up onto the lawn. The tires chewing into the grass, I paid a landscaper to maintain. I did not care. I turned off the ignition. I stepped out of the car. The evening air was thick and humid, but I felt nothing but cold. I walked up the driveway. I could hear the bass of the music they were playing inside. I reached into my bag and closed my hand around my keys. The metal was cool and sharp against my palm. I walked up the steps to the front door. I looked at the Vibes neon sign hanging there. I took a deep breath. They wanted a show. They wanted a reveal. I was about to give them the performance of a lifetime. I slid the key into the lock. It turned with a smooth, silent click. I pushed the door open. The engine of the silver rental sedan ticked as it cooled. A metallic metronome counting down the seconds to the end of my life as I knew it. I sat behind the wheel, parked not on my driveway, but 3 houses down, tucked into the shadow of an overgrown oak tree that belonged to the Wilsons. I had turned the headlights off. I was invisible. I needed to be invisible because I was no longer a daughter returning from a business trip. I was a surveillance unit. I looked at the digital clock on the dashboard. It was 6:32 in the evening. The sky was bruising into a deep, heavy twilight, the kind that promised a storm. But the only thunder tonight was coming from the bass line vibrating out of my open front door. My house, usually a sanctuary of silence and order, was pulsing. From where I sat, I could see the scene with painful clarity. It looked like a fraternity house during rush week, or a film set run by amateurs. The driveway was not just blocked, it was conquered. The white van I had seen earlier was still there, its back doors yawning open like a hungry mouth. Next to it was my father's minivan, parked haphazardly on the grass, leaving deep tire ruts in the sod I had paid a landscaping crew $2,000 to install last spring. But it was the third vehicle that made my blood run cold. It was a bright yellow sports car, something flashy and loud, parked directly across the apron of the driveway, blocking the sidewalk. It screamed entitlement. It belonged to one of Mason's friends, no doubt another person who believed the rules of civil society were merely suggestions. I rolled down my window an inch. The humid Virginia air seeped in, carrying the sound of laughter and the heavy, rhythmic thumping of electronic dance music. My neighbors were going to hate me. I could see the curtains twitching at the house across the street. Mrs. Higgins was watching. I felt a flush of shame, hot and prickly, but I pushed it down. Shame was a luxury I could not afford right now. I needed to be cold. I picked up my phone and unlocked it. My thumb hovered over Simone's contact info, but first, I needed the evidence. Simone had been clear document the disruption. I stepped out of the car. I left the door unlatched so it would not slam. I moved quietly along the sidewalk, keeping to the shadows of the street lamps. As I got closer, the details of the violation became sharper. There were boxes stacked on the front porch, not just generic brown moving boxes, but white cardboard cartons with custom-printed labels. I zoomed in with my phone camera, snapping a photo. I looked at the image on my screen. The label read, Mason Studio, Official Gear. I stared at it, my breath hitching in my throat. This was not a decision made 3 days ago. You do not get custom-branded moving boxes printed and delivered in 48 hours. This had been in the works for weeks, maybe months. While I was paying his car insurance, while I was buying him dinner, he was designing the logo for the hostile takeover of my home. I took another photo, then another. I walked around the perimeter of the lawn, documenting the license plates of the van and the yellow sports car. I took a video of the ruts in the grass. Every image was a time-stamped nail in the coffin of their defense. I crept closer to the living room window. The blinds were open. They wanted the world to see in, which meant I had a front-row seat to the circus. Through the glass, I saw what they had done to my sanctuary. The furniture was gone. My sofa, my coffee table, my lamps, all erased. In their place stood a large, curved backdrop made of black fabric, stretched tight over a metal frame. It looked like the set of a low-budget talk show. Mason was standing in front of it. He was holding a microphone, a professional one, not a toy. He was gesturing wildly, talking to the phone that was mounted on the tripod. He looked manic, high on the adrenaline of attention. My mother was standing just off camera. She was holding a reflector, bouncing light onto Mason's face. She looked focused, intense, subservient to his vision. She was not a mother in that moment. She was a production assistant. I saw the blonde girl, Kara, sitting at my dining table in the background. She was typing furiously on a laptop, surrounded by stacks of paper. The lease. The affidavit. I lifted my phone and took a burst of photos through the window. Flash off, exposure up. I captured Mason's grin. I captured my mother's complicity. I captured the stranger at my table handling my financial future. My pocket buzzed. It was a text from Simone. "Are you in position?" I typed back, my fingers moving with mechanical precision. "I am outside. I have the photos. The house is full of people. They are broadcasting live." Simone replied instantly. "Remember the objective. You are not there to argue. You are there to serve notice. Do not let them drag you into a debate. If you feel unsafe, call 911. I looked at the house. I did not feel unsafe in the physical sense. I felt something far more dangerous. I felt a complete and total absence of fear. I had spent my whole life afraid of disappointing them, afraid of being the bad daughter, afraid of the conflict. But standing there in the dark, watching them desecrate the home I had built with my own labor, the fear evaporated. I texted Simone one last time. "I am going in. If I do not text you in 15 minutes, execute the police call." I put the phone in my jacket pocket, but I left the voice recorder app running. I checked my cloud backup. The photos were already uploaded. The security camera footage from the interior was secure. I looked toward the house next door. The lights were off at Ruth's place, but I saw a silhouette in the window. Ruth was there. She was watching. I had my witness. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the heavy, humid air. It smelled of exhaust fumes and freshly cut grass. This was it, the moment of impact. I walked up the driveway. My heels clicked on the pavement, a sharp, staccato rhythm that was lost under the bass of the music coming from the house. I walked past the white van. I walked past the yellow sports car. I walked past the boxes labeled Mason's Studio. I reached the front porch. The Vibes neon sign was buzzing with a low, electrical hum. It cast a garish pink light onto the welcome mat, a mat that I had bought, which they were currently trampling. I reached for the door handle. It was locked. Of course it was locked. They wanted to keep the world out while they broadcast their version of reality to it. I pulled my keys from my pocket. My hand was steady. I slid the key into the lock. I turned it. The deadbolt slid back with a heavy thud. I did not hesitate. I did not knock. I did not give them the courtesy of a warning. I pushed the door open and stepped across the threshold. The transition was jarring. The humidity of the outside was instantly replaced by the blast of air conditioning. The muffled music became a physical wall of sound, a bass beat that rattled the fillings in my teeth. I stood in the foyer. For 3 seconds, no one noticed me. Mason was shouting into the microphone, "And we are just getting started. Guys, this is just phase 1 of the empire. We are going to be dropping content every single day from this spot." My mother was adjusting the reflector, frowning at a shadow on his chin. Kara was typing. My father was coming out of the kitchen, holding a tray of pizza rolls. Then, the air in the room seemed to shift. My father saw me first. He stopped dead in his tracks, the tray in his hands tilted dangerously. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes went wide, reflecting the ring light in 2 tiny, terrified circles. "Linda," he croaked. The word was swallowed by the music. He tried again. Louder. "Linda." My mother turned, annoyed at the interruption. "What is it?" "Greg. We are live. Keep it down." She followed his gaze. She saw me. The color drained from her face so fast, it looked like a special effect. Her hand, holding the reflector, dropped to her side. The reflector hit the floor with a clatter. Mason, oblivious, was still talking to his digital audience. "We are building a legacy here. People, a family legacy." "Mason?" My mother hissed. Mason turned. He looked at my mother, then at my father, and finally, he turned his head toward the door. He saw me standing there. I was wearing my travel clothes, black trousers, a white blouse, a trench coat. I was holding my purse in one hand and my phone in the other. I was not smiling. I was not frowning. I was simply present. Mason's smile faltered. It did not disappear, but it twitched, as if his face was trying to hold on to the persona while his brain processed the reality. "Nora," he said. His voice was picked up by the microphone, broadcast to whoever was watching. The music was still pounding. "Turn it off," I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the room like a razor blade. Mason blinked. "Whoa. Hey, sis, you are back early. We were just turn it off," I said, enunciating every word. One of the guys in the corner, the one who had been drinking my sparkling water, scrambled to a laptop and hit the space bar. The music died. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. It was the silence of a vacuum, sucking the oxygen out of the room. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the soft whir of the cooling fan on the ring light. Every eye in the room was fixed on me. My mother, my father, Mason, Kara, the two strangers. They looked at me as if I were the intruder. They looked at me as if I had broken into their home. My mother took a half step forward, her instincts kicking in. She put on her soothing, managing face, the one she used when I was a toddler throwing a tantrum. "Nora, honey," she began, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "You scared us. We thought you were in San Diego until Friday. Look at you. You look exhausted. Why did you not call?" She was trying to reset the frame. She was trying to make my arrival the error, and her presence the baseline. I did not look at her. I looked at the tripod. I looked at the phone that was still streaming. I walked into the room. My footsteps were loud on the hardwood floor, the floor I had refinished 2 years ago. I walked straight past my father, who shrank back as if I were radioactive. I walked past my mother, who reached out to touch my arm. I sidestepped her without breaking stride. I walked right up to the tripod. Mason stepped back, holding the microphone like a shield. "Hey, Nora, seriously, we are live right now," he whispered, his eyes darting to the phone screen. "Do not make a scene in front of the subs." I looked at the phone screen. I saw the comments scrolling by. "Who is that? Is that the sister awkward LOL? Drama." I looked at the camera lens. I looked directly into the digital eye that was broadcasting my humiliation to the world. I reached out. Mason flinched. "Don't touch it." "That is a $2,000 setup. I did not knock it over. I did not smash it. That would be destruction of property." I simply reached out and tapped the End Live button on the screen. The screen went black. I turned to face them. The room was frozen. It was a tableau of guilt. My father was still holding the pizza rolls. Kara was clutching her papers to her chest. My mother was wringing her hands. Mason looked like a balloon that had been pricked. The charisma leaked out of him, replaced by a sullen, petulant defensiveness. "You just killed my stream." "Nora," he said, his voice rising. "Do you know how the algorithm works? You cannot just cut a feed like that." I looked around the room. I looked at the black backdrop blocking my view of the garden. I looked at the scratches on the floor where they had dragged the equipment cases. I looked at the neon sign reflecting in the window. I took a deep breath. I did not feel the urge to scream. I did not feel the urge to cry. I felt a profound sense of clarity. This was not a family. This was a parasite. And I was the host. But the host had just woken up. I looked at Mason, then at my parents. "Get out," I said. My mother let out a nervous little laugh. "Nora, stop it. You are tired. You are jet-lagged. Let us sit down and have some pizza rolls. We made space for you." She gestured to a folding chair in the corner. A folding chair. In my own house. I did not move. "I am not tired," I said, "and I am not hungry. I am the owner of this property. You are trespassing." Mason scoffed. He threw the microphone onto the sofa, my sofa, which was pushed against the wall. "Trespassing," he sneered. "Jesus, Nora, get over yourself. Mom and Dad said I could stay. It is family property." I turned my head slowly to look at him. "It is not family property," I said. "My name is on the deed. My name is on the mortgage. My name is on the insurance. The only thing you own in this room is that ridiculous sign on the door." My father stepped forward, trying to play the peacemaker. "Nora, please, don't speak to your brother like that. We were just trying to help him get a start. We can discuss this like adults. I looked at my father, the man who had asked for a signature for car insurance and used it to try and mortgage my future. We are done discussing. I said, the discussion ended when you forged my signature. The air left the room completely. Kara, the blonde girl at the table, gasped, a small, sharp sound. She dropped the pen she was holding. My mother froze. My father turned pale gray. Mason looked confused, then angry. I did not forge anything, I was just preparing the paperwork. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I held it up. I have the bank on speed dial. I lied. I have the police on the other line. And I have a lawyer who has already drafted the eviction notice. I took a step toward the center of the room. You have turned my home into a stage, I said, my voice steady and cold. So let us play it out. Act 1 is over. This is the part where the audience goes home. I looked at the two strangers by the equipment cases. You two, I said, pack your gear. If you are not out of this house in 10 minutes, the police will confiscate your equipment as evidence of a crime scene. They did not look at Mason for permission. They did not look at my mother. They saw the look in my eyes, and they started packing. I turned back to my family. My mother's face hardened. The sweet mask dropped, revealing the bitterness underneath. You are being incredibly selfish. Nora, she snapped. After everything we have done for you, you are going to ruin your brother's big break because you are jealous. I almost laughed, but I didn't. I am not jealous. Mom, I said, I am evicted. By you. In my own house, I pointed to the door. I am going to stand here and watch you leave. All of you, right now. Mason crossed his arms. I am not going anywhere. I have rights. I have established residency. I looked at him. I looked at the boxes labeled Mason Studio that were still sitting on the porch. You have been here for 6 hours. I said, you have not established residency. You have established a breaking and entering charge. I looked at Kara. And you? I said, if that affidavit on the table has a signature on it that is not mine, you are looking at being an accessory to federal bank fraud. Do you have a law degree? Or are you just doing what he tells you? Kara stood up. She gathered her papers with shaking hands. I didn't know. She stammered. I thought, they said you were on board. She looked at Mason with a look of pure betrayal. Then she shoved the papers into her bag and walked toward the door. Kara, wait, Mason shouted. She did not wait. She walked out the door and into the night. I looked back at my family. Tick-tock, I said. My mother stared at me with hatred. My father stared at the floor. Mason stared at the door where his financing had just walked out. I stood my ground. I was not the golden child. I was not the artist. I was the wall they had run into at full speed, and I was not moving. The sudden silence in the living room was heavier than the bass that had been shaking the floorboards just seconds before. The air conditioner hummed, a low mechanical drone that sounded like a held breath. I stood in the foyer, my knuckles white as I gripped the handle of my rolling suitcase. Though I did not move it, I just stood there, a statue of judgment in a trench coat, watching the color drain from the faces of the people who claimed to love me. My mother, Linda, was the first to recover. Her shock did not dissolve into relief or happiness at seeing her daughter safely home from a cross-country trip. It hardened instantly into annoyance. It was the look she used to give me when I interrupted a dinner party with a childhood fever inconvenience masked as concern. She stepped over a coil of thick black extension cords that were snake-lined across my hardwood floor. She smoothed the front of her blouse, her eyes darting to the strangers in the room and then back to me. Narrowing slightly. "Why are you home so early?" she asked. Her voice was sharp, pitched slightly higher than usual. It was not a greeting. It was an accusation. "You were supposed to be in San Diego until Friday. We are busy here. Nora, we are in the middle of something." I looked at her. I looked at the way she stood with her feet planted firmly on my rug, the one I had bought in Morocco, as if she were the captain of a ship repelling a boarder. "I am not early," I said. My voice was low, level, and stripped of any warmth. "I am right on time." My father, Greg, moved quickly then. He had always been the physical barrier in the family, the one who used his bulk to block doorways and difficult conversations. He stepped between me and the center of the room, holding his hands up in a gesture that was meant to be calming but felt suffocating. He smelled of nervous sweat and the garlic from the pizza rolls he had been serving. "Nora, please," he whispered, leaning in close so the two strangers near the equipment cases would not hear. "Don't make a big deal out of this. Don't make a scene. People are here. We have guests. Guests." I looked past his shoulder at the two young men in backward caps who were currently freezing in place, looking like deer caught in headlights. They were not guests. They were invaders who had been invited in by traitors. I stepped around my father. I did not shove him, but I moved with such decisive momentum that he was forced to shuffle backward to avoid a collision. "I am not making a scene, Dad," I said, not whispering. "I am inspecting my property." Mason was standing near the black backdrop. He had recovered his composure, or at least, the manic, desperate version of it that he used when he was cornered. He saw me approaching, and instead of turning the camera off, he pivoted the tripod. He swung the lens toward me. He was gambling. He was betting that I would not humiliate him while the red recording light was on. He was betting on the old Nora, the one who would smile tightly and play along to protect the family reputation. He forced a grin that looked painful. It stretched the skin over his cheekbones, revealing too many teeth. "And look who it is. Guys," he shouted, his voice cracking slightly. "It is my sister Nora. She just flew in to surprise us for the big launch." He waved a hand at me, a gesture like a ringmaster presenting a lion that he hoped was sedated. "This is Nora, everyone. She is the best. She is totally 100% okay with all of this. She is actually the one who encouraged me to set up the studio here." I stopped walking. I was 3 feet away from the lens. I could see the comments scrolling up the side of the phone screen in real time. I could see the viewer count. 412 people were watching. 412 witnesses. I looked at Mason. His eyes were wide, pleading, begging me to pick up the script he was handing me. He wanted me to say hello. He wanted me to wave. He wanted me to validate the lie. I turned my head and looked directly into the camera lens. I imagined the 412 people sitting in their rooms, watching this train wreck. "No," I said. The word hung in the air, absolute and final. I did not smile. I did not blink. "I am not okay with this." I said to the camera, "I did not encourage this. This is my house. I did not know you were here, and you are not supposed to be here." The room seemed to tilt. The comments on the screen exploded, scrolling so fast they were a blur of text. But I caught the vibe. The audience knew something was wrong. The illusion of the successful, supported creator had just shattered. Mason let out a sound that was half laugh, half choke. He reached for the phone, his hand shaking. "Okay, technical difficulties. Guys, we are going to..." He tapped the screen frantically, ending the stream. The light went out. He spun on me, his face twisting into a scowl that was far more familiar to me than the smile. "What the hell?" "Nora," he hissed, "you just killed the stream. Do you know how hard it is to get that much momentum? You just embarrassed me in front of everyone." I looked at him calmly. "You embarrassed yourself." "Mason, I just turned on the lights." Before he could respond, my mother was there. She clamped her hand around my upper arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her fingernails digging into the fabric of my trench coat. She did not ask. She pulled. She dragged me toward the corner of the room, near the hallway, away from the strangers who were now whispering to each other and starting to pack up their gear. She backed me against the wall. Her face was flushed, her lips pressed into a thin, white line. "What is wrong with you?" she demanded in a furious whisper. "Why do you have to be so difficult?" I looked down at her hand on my arm. I did not pull away. I just looked at it, until she became uncomfortable and let go. "I am not the one who broke into a house. Mom," I said. "It is not breaking in," she snapped. "It is family. Your brother needs this. Nora, he needs a win. He has been struggling so much lately. You have no idea the pressure he is under." She gestured wildly at the room, at the black curtain blocking my windows, at the ring lights, at the mess. We just need the space for a few months, she said, her voice dropping into that wheedling, guilt-inducing tone I knew so well. Just until he gets his feet under him. Just until the channel takes off. You have so much room here. You are always traveling. You do not even use the living room. I felt a cold fire burning in my chest. It was the injustice of it. The assumption that my space was available simply because I was successful enough to own it. I use the living room to live. I said, it is not a soundstage. You are being selfish, she spat out. The word came out like a bullet. Selfish. You have a good job. You have money. You have this big house all to yourself, and you cannot spare a corner for your own brother. You are so selfish. Nora. There it was, the ultimate weapon in the Caldwell arsenal. If I did not give them everything, I was taking something away from them. I looked her in the eye. I felt taller than I had ever felt in my life. Selfish is not owning a house, I said, keeping my voice steady and quiet. Selfish is moving into someone else's home when they are out of town. Selfish is diverting their mail. Selfish is forging their signature. My mother flinched as if I had slapped her. Her eyes widened. I do not know what you are talking about, she stammered, but the lie was written all over her face. I think you do, I said, and we are going to talk about it, but not yet. I turned back to the room. Mason was pacing back and forth, running his hands through his hair. He looked like a child whose toy had been taken away. You ruined it, he muttered, glaring at me. You ruined the vibe. I had sponsors watching that stream. Nora, real sponsors. You probably just cost me $5,000 in brand deals. I walked over to the dining table, my dining table, the one made of reclaimed oak that I had spent months saving for. It was covered in papers, contracts, notes, and right on top, the affidavit. I picked up my purse and set it down on the table with a heavy thud. The sound made everyone jump. I am not ruining your work. Mason, I said. I looked at the mess in my living room. I looked at the scratches on the floor. I looked at the hole they had likely drilled into the wall to mount the backdrop. I am stopping a crime, I said. And as for ruining things, you ruined my home first. The two strangers by the door had seen enough. One of them, the taller guy with the beard, zipped up his equipment bag. Hey man, he said to Mason, we are gonna head out. This seems personal. Mason turned to them, desperate. No, wait, don't go. She is just tired. We can reset. We can go live again in 10 minutes. The guy shook his head. Nah, bro, we are good. Catch you later. They opened the front door. The humid night air rushed in, breaking the seal of the air-conditioned tension. My mother rushed forward. She plastered a smile on her face, trying to block their exit. Oh, please don't leave yet, she chirped. It is just a misunderstanding. We are ordering pizza. Family settles things internally, right? We just need a minute to clear the air. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. Tell them. Nora. Tell them it is fine. Tell them we are handling this internally. She wanted me to lie. She wanted me to smooth it over so the audience would come back. She wanted to pretend that the violence of their invasion was just a little family hiccup. I looked at the open door. I looked at the neighbors' houses across the street. I could see Mrs. Higgins standing on her porch now, watching. I looked back at my mother. I picked up the affidavit from the table. I held it up. It is not internal anymore. Mom, I said. I walked to the door and held it open for the strangers. They hurried past me, murmuring apologies, desperate to escape the blast radius of my anger. I watched them get into the yellow sports car. I watched them drive away. Then I closed the door. I locked it. I turned the deadbolt. I turned back to the three people standing in my living room. You made my house a stage, I said. You wanted an audience. You wanted everyone to see what you were doing. I walked over to the black backdrop. I grabbed the edge of the fabric. Well, now you have an audience, I said. I ripped the fabric down. The metal stand clattered to the floor with a crash that echoed like a gunshot. But the show is over, I said. Now we are doing the audit. Mason stared at the fallen backdrop. My father sat down heavily on the folding chair, putting his head in his hands. My mother stood in the center of the room, vibrating with rage. "You are going to regret this," she whispered. I looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I realized she was small. She was not the giant who controlled my world. She was just a small, greedy woman standing in a house she did not own. "I already regret a lot of things," I said, "like trusting you with a key." I walked to the kitchen island. I pulled out my phone. I placed it on the counter. Screen up. I saw the folder I had created on the plane. Caldwell pattern. I opened it. "Sit down," I said. No one moved. I said, "Sit down." My voice was not loud, but it had the weight of the mortgage, the deed, and the truth behind it. Slowly, reluctantly, Mason pulled out a chair and sat. My mother perched on the edge of the sofa arm. My father stayed in the folding chair. I looked at them. "I have some questions," I said, "and I suggest you answer them carefully, because the next person who walks through that door will not be a subscriber. It will be a lawyer." I reached into my bag and pulled out the manila folder I had prepared on the plane. It was a standard office folder, beige and unassuming, the kind you might use to store tax returns or appliance warranties. But as I laid it on the kitchen island, the sound it made against the quartz countertop was heavy, like a judge's gavel striking the bench. The room was quiet now, stripped of the thumping bass and the adoring fans on the live stream. The only audience left was the three people who had spent a lifetime convincing me that my boundaries were malleable. I opened the folder. Inside lay a spreadsheet, printed in landscape mode, the font small and precise. It was an autopsy of my generosity. I did not scream. I did not throw the papers at them. I simply ran my finger down the first column. "Let us look at the record," I said. My voice was calm, almost conversational. It was the voice I used when I had to explain to a client why they were failing a compliance audit. I looked at Mason. He was slouching in the chair, his arms crossed over his chest, looking like a teenager waiting out a detention. 2020. I read, November, $1,200. You said your transmission blew out on the highway. You sent me a photo of a tow truck. I looked up. I checked the metadata on that photo. Mason, it was downloaded from Google Images. The date on the file was from 2018. Mason rolled his eyes. "Oh my God. Are we really doing this?" "That was 5 years ago." "Who keeps track of this stuff I do?" I said, "I keep track, because the very next day, your credit card statement, which Mom accidentally forwarded to me inside a chain email, showed a charge of exactly $1,200 at an Apple store. You bought an iPad Pro. You did not fix a transmission. You bought a toy." My mother shifted on the arm of the sofa. "Nora, stop it. He needed that iPad for his design portfolio. It was an investment." I ignored her. I flipped the page. 2021. I continued. January, rent assistance. You told me you were short because your hours got cut. $1,800, direct transfer. I looked at my father. You vouched for him. Dad, you told me he was working so hard. But that was the month he quit his job to become a crypto consultant, wasn't it? My father rubbed his face with his hands. Nora, we were just trying to keep a roof over his head. What did you want us to do? Let him get evicted. I wanted you to tell the truth. I said. I read on. The list was long. It was a litany of lies. $600 for emergency dental work that turned out to be VIP tickets to a music festival. $3,000 for a camera lens for a photography business that lasted 3 weeks. $500 for a suit for a job interview that never happened. I stopped reading and looked at the total at the bottom of the page. $42,850. I said, I let the number hang in the air. That is not just money. Mason, that is a down payment on a house. That is a graduate degree. That is 3 years of my retirement savings. That is $42,000 of my labor that you ate, wore, and played with. Mason scoffed. It was a sharp, ugly sound. He uncrossed his arms and leaned forward, his face twisting into a sneer of pure entitlement. You are rich. Nora, he snapped. Look at this house. Look at your car. You make more in a month than I make in a year. So what if you helped me out? That is what family does. You have it. I need it. Why are you acting like I stole food out of your mouth? You did not even miss it. I felt a vein throb in my temple. The absolute lack of gratitude was breathtaking. I did miss it, I said softly. I missed the vacations I did not take. I missed the investments I did not make. But that is not the point. I leaned across the island, looking him dead in the eye. There is a difference between charity and theft. Mason, help is when you are asked. Theft is when you are lied to. You did not ask for help. You engineered crises so I would feel obligated to rescue you. You manipulated my empathy to fund your lifestyle. My father stood up abruptly. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. His face was red, his expression a mix of shame and anger. That is enough, he shouted. He lunged toward the counter, his hand reaching for the folder. You are not going to stand here and shame your brother like this. He is trying his best. He was fast. But I was expecting it. I snatched the folder away before his fingers could graze the paper. I held it tight against my chest. I am not shaming him, Dad, I said. Stepping back, I am exposing him, and I am stopping him. My father froze, his hand still outstretched. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw the man he used to be, the father who taught me to ride a bike, who checked my homework. But that man was gone, buried under years of enabling his son. Give me the papers. Nora, he said, his voice trembling. This is private family business. It was private, I said, until you brought a camera crew into my living room. I turned away from him, placing the folder back on the counter but keeping my hand firmly on top of it. As I did, my gaze fell on the other end of the kitchen island. There was a stack of papers there. The papers that Kara, the blonde girl, had been working on before she fled. In the chaos of her exit, she had left them behind. I walked over to them. My mother saw where I was looking. Her eyes widened. Nora, don't, she said, her voice rising in panic. Those are just drafts. They do not mean anything. I picked up the top document. It was a standard form, downloaded from the internet. The header read, Room Lease Agreement. I scanned the details. Landlord Nora Miller, tenant Mason Caldwell, lease term 12 months, monthly rent, $2,500. I paused. $2,500. Mason didn't have $25, let alone $2,500. Then I understood. This wasn't a lease for him to pay me. This was a fake lease to show a bank. He needed to prove he had a stable housing situation with a high cost of living to justify the loan amount, or perhaps to show residency for the HELOC application. It was a prop. A piece of theater designed to fool an underwriter. But it was the bottom of the page that made my heart stop. There were 2 signature lines. One was signed in a messy, looping scrawl, Mason Caldwell. The other line was the landlord's signature, and it was already signed. I stared at it. It was my name. Nora Miller. The slant was right. The capital N was sharp, just the way I wrote it. The tail of the A curled up, to a casual observer, to a bank clerk glancing at a PDF. It would look perfect, but I knew my hand, and I knew that I had not signed this. The loop on the M was too round. I wrote with a sharp, jagged peak. This was a tracing. Someone had taken the signature I sent for the car insurance, projected it, and traced it onto this document. It was a forgery, a decent one, but a forgery nonetheless. I felt a coldness spread through my body that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. This was a felony. My brother had sat at my table, in my house, and practiced committing a crime against me. I did not rip the paper. I did not crumble it. I pulled out my phone. I held the camera steady directly over the signature. I took a high-resolution photo. Then I took another one of the entire page. "What are you doing?" Mason demanded. He was standing up now, looking nervous. "That is just a draft. I was just practicing." "Practicing," I repeated. "You were practicing being me." I looked at the ink. It was black ballpoint. It was fresh. My mother rushed forward, trying to put her body between me and the paper. "Nora, please," she said, her voice breathless. "It is just for the file. It is just paperwork to keep things tidy. You know how banks are. They need so many forms. We were just going to show it to them so they would process the application faster. Nobody is going to sue family. It is just for fun. For fun. She called federal bank fraud fun. She called identity theft a housekeeping measure. I looked at her, and I felt the last tether of childhood guilt snap. This is not fun. Mom, I said, this is a Class B felony. Forgery of a legal document. Fraudulent inducement. I looked at Mason. You signed this. I said, you signed my name. Mason's face was pale, but he tried to maintain his bravado. I did not sign it, he lied. Even though the pen was literally sitting right next to the paper. And even if I did, who cares? You would have signed it anyway if you were here. I just saved you the trouble. You saved me the trouble. I repeated. I looked around the room. The boxes were still there. The scratches were on the floor. The neon sign was still buzzing on the door. I turned to the invisible audience, the ghosts of the people they had invited in. The followers on the stream. The neighbors across the street. If anyone thought this was a heartwarming story about a family helping a struggling artist, I said, speaking to the empty air, you were lied to. This house does not belong to Mason. It never did. And it never will. I looked back at my parents. You told people this was his studio. I said, you let him parade around here like he owned the place. You deceived his friends. You deceived his sponsors. You deceived the bank. Mason slammed his hand down on the table. Shut up, he shouted. Just shut up. Turn off the camera. He looked around wildly, as if he expected a lens to be hidden in the potted plants. There is no camera. Mason, I said, the stream is off. Then stop acting like this, he yelled. Stop talking like a lawyer. We can talk about this privately. We are family. We can fix this. He reached out, trying to grab my arm, trying to pull me into a huddle, trying to force the intimacy that he had exploited for years. I stepped back, out of his reach. My mother nodded frantically. Yes, exactly. Mason is right. We just need to talk privately. No more drama. No more lawyers. Just us. We can work this out. Nora? We can tear up that paper. We can pretend it never happened. She reached for the lease agreement. I put my hand over it. No, I said. My mother froze. What? I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had told me to be the bigger person since I was 6 years old. The woman who had told me that letting my brother steal from me was an act of love. You want to keep this private? I asked. You want to handle this internally? Yes, she cried. Please, Nora. I shook my head slowly. You stood in this room 2 hours ago. I said, you stood right there. Mom, and you told Dad not to worry about me. You said, and I quote, do not worry, she will not make a scene. My mother's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked terrified. She realized then that I had heard everything. You banked on my silence. I said, you bet everything on the fact that I would be too polite, too well-trained, and too desperate for your approval to fight back. I picked up the forged lease. I folded it neatly and placed it into my bag. But you forgot one thing. I said. I looked at Mason, who was trembling with a mix of rage and fear. You forgot that I am the one who pays the bills. I said, and the person who pays the bills gets to set the rules. Mason glared at me. It is too late to act tough now. Nora, he spat, you already let us in. We are here. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile that did not reach my eyes. I remembered the words my mother had used to dismiss my father's concerns. You are right, I said. It is too late. I looked at the digital clock on the microwave. It was 8 o'clock. It is too late for privacy. I said, it is too late for internal discussions, and it is definitely too late for you to pretend this was a mistake. I turned and walked toward the front door. Where are you going? My father asked, panic rising in his voice. Nora, do not leave. We have not settled this. I stopped at the door with my hand on the knob. I am not leaving. Dad, I said, I live here. I unlocked the door. But I did not open it. I just unlocked it. I am just making sure the door is unlocked, I said. Why? Mason asked, suspicious. Because, I said, checking my watch again. The next guest is arriving in exactly 2 minutes. And unlike you, I said, looking at my brother, this one actually has a license to be here. The doorbell did not just ring, it assaulted the house. It was a sharp, insistent staccato ding-dong, ding-dong, ding-dong that cut through the tension in the living room like a serrated knife. It was not the polite chime of a guest arriving for dinner. It was the urgent demand of someone who had been watching, waiting, and had finally lost their patience. I stood by the door, my hand still resting near the lock. The metal felt warm under my palm. My father, Greg, jumped in his chair, the folding metal legs screeching against the hardwood floor. My mother, Linda, looked at the door with a mixture of annoyance and fear. Mason stopped pacing, his eyes darting toward the window where the black curtains still lay in a crumpled heap on the floor. "Who is that?" my mother hissed. "Did you call the police?" "Nora." "You said you hadn't called them yet." I did not answer her. I turned the deadbolt and pulled the heavy oak door open. The humidity of the Virginia evening rushed in again, but this time it brought people with it. Standing on my front porch, illuminated by the garish pink light of Mason's Neon Vibes sign, were 2 people. On the left was Ruth McKenna, my neighbor, my friend. She was wearing her gardening cardigan, her arms crossed over her chest, her face set in a grim line of disapproval. She looked like a retired school principal ready to expel the entire student body. On the right was a man I knew only vaguely, but whose emails I received weekly, Mr. Henderson, the president of our homeowners association. He was a short, fastidious man who measured grass height with a ruler, and right now, he was vibrating with indignation. "Ms. Miller," Mr. Henderson said. He did not say hello. He held up a clipboard. "We have received multiple complaints in the last 3 hours." I stepped back, opening the door wider so my family could see them. I wanted them to hear this. "Complaints about what, Mr. Henderson?" I asked, keeping my voice polite but loud enough to carry to the back of the room. Mr. Henderson consulted his clipboard, ticking off items on his fingers. "Unauthorized commercial vehicles parked on the lawn." Not the driveway, the lawn. "We have photographic evidence of tire ruts in the sod. Excessive noise levels exceeding the neighborhood decibel limit after 6 in the evening. And most concerningly, significant foot traffic suggesting an unauthorized commercial event or gathering in a residential zone." He peered past me, his eyes widening as he took in the scene in my living room, the displaced furniture, the equipment cases, the ring light stand, the crumpled backdrop. "I see my suspicions were correct," he said, his tone dripping with vindication. "You are running a production studio out of a residential property. This is a violation of Bylaw Section 4, Paragraph C. If you do not cease operations immediately and clear those vehicles, I am authorized to call the county sheriff and have a citation issued for zoning violations." My mother stormed forward. She pushed past my father, marching right up to the threshold. She was small, but she puffed herself up like a bantam hen protecting a very stupid chick. "Excuse me," she snapped at Mr. Henderson. "Who do you think you are? This is a private family home. We are just moving my son in." Mr. Henderson looked at her, unimpressed. "Moving in does not require stage lighting and a subwoofer." "Ma'am." My mother turned her glare on Ruth. "And you?" she shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Ruth's face. "You called him, didn't you? I saw you watching from your window. What is wrong with you?" "Ruth, we have been neighbors well. Nora has been your neighbor for 3 years. I thought we were friends." Ruth did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She looked at my mother with a calm, pitying expression that was far more devastating than anger. "We are friends, Linda," Ruth said. "I am friends with Nora. That is why I called." My mother let out a shrill, incredulous laugh. "You called the HOA on us to help Nora. That is ridiculous. This is a family matter. You are interfering in family business. You should be ashamed of yourself. Spying on us like that." Ruth took a small step forward. She looked past my mother, straight at me, and gave me a tiny, reassuring nod. Then she looked back at Linda. "Linda," Ruth said, her voice steel hard, Family is the people who protect your home, not the people who break into it. You were destroying her lawn. You were disturbing the peace. And frankly, family does not allow trespassing. My mother gasped. Trespassing. We are her parents. Ruth shrugged. I have the deed records too. Linda, I checked online before I called Mr. Henderson. Nora is the only name on the title. If she did not invite you, you are trespassing. And by the look on Nora's face, I would say the invitation got lost in the mail. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat loudly. I do not care about the family dynamics, he said. I care about the bylaws. You have 30 minutes to move those vans off the grass and silence the noise, or I call the police. That is a promise. He turned and walked down the steps, his shoes clicking on the pavement. Ruth lingered for a second. I will stay on my porch. Nora, she said softly, if you need me to call the other authorities, just wave. Thank you. Ruth, I said, I truly meant it. Ruth turned and walked away. My mother slammed the door shut. She spun around, her face purple with rage. Can you believe her? She screamed. The nerve calling the HOA on us. I should go over there and what I interrupted. I was leaning against the wall, watching them. The air in the room felt thin, brittle. You should go over there and what? Mom. Yell at her for telling the truth. My mother looked at me, her chest heaving. She is trying to humiliate us. She is trying to make us look like criminals. I gestured to the forged lease in my bag. I gestured to the tire tracks I knew were currently pressed into my lawn. You are doing a fine job of that all by yourself, I said. Mason stood up from the table. He looked shaky. The reality of the outside world was crashing in on his little fantasy bubble. Okay, he said, running a hand through his hair. So we have to move the vans. Big deal. I will tell the guys to park on the street next time. It is just a noise complaint. Nora, it is a $50 fine. I will pay it. You will pay it, I asked. With what money? Mason. The money you were going to get from the loan you forged my signature for. Mason opened his mouth to argue. But before he could speak, the front door opened again. I had unlocked it for the neighbors, but I had not locked it back. I turned, expecting Mr. Henderson to be back with more threats. But it was not Mr. Henderson. A man walked into my foyer. He was tall, dressed in a sharp navy blue suit that looked expensive. He held a leather portfolio under one arm and was checking something on his iPhone. He looked up, startled to see 5 people staring at him in a silent, wrecked living room. He hesitated, one foot still on the welcome mat. Oh, excuse me, he said. The door was unlatched. I knocked, but with the shouting, I assumed it was okay to come in. He looked around the room, his eyes scanning the equipment, the black curtain on the floor, and the general chaos. He nodded, as if this confirmed something. Is this the studio? He asked. I stared at him. The studio. My mother stepped forward, confused. Who are you? The man smiled. A professional. Practiced smile. I am David Vance. He said, I am a location scout and broker. I saw the listing online about an hour ago. I happened to be in the neighborhood showing another property, and I wanted to get a look at the space before it gets booked up. He took a step further into the room, stepping over a coil of cable. Great natural light, he muttered, looking at the windows. High ceilings, good for acoustics. I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving me cold and dizzy. The listing, I repeated. My voice sounded hollow. David looked at me. Yes, the listing on Peerspace and Craigslist. He held up his phone. Studio space for rent. Day rates and weekly rates available. Includes professional lighting, green screen, and private changing room. He swiped on the screen. $500 a day. He turned the phone around so I could see it. There was a photo on the screen. It was a photo of my living room. But it was not from today. It was from yesterday. I could tell because the furniture was still there, just pushed to the side, but then he swiped to the next photo. It was my bedroom, my master bedroom, my sanctuary. The photo showed the bed made, with a caption, Private Changing Area. Talent Holding Room. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to grip the back of a chair to stay upright. They had been in my bedroom, they had photographed it, and they had listed it on the internet for strangers to rent by the hour. I looked at Mason. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the floor, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead. He was chewing his lip. "You listed my house," I whispered. The room was silent. Even my mother looked shocked. She had known about the move-in. She had known about the loan. But selling access to strangers, that seemed to be a line even she had not realized they had crossed. David, the broker, looked between us, sensing the atmosphere. Is the space not available?" he asked. The listing said immediate availability. The contact name was Mason. He tapped the screen. Mason Caldwell. I walked over to the broker. I moved like a ghost. I took the phone from his hand. I looked at the profile. Mason's face was the profile picture. He was wearing sunglasses and looking cool. The account had been created 3 days ago. 3 days ago, while I was in San Diego, while I was texting them to check in. I handed the phone back to David. "I am sorry," I said. My voice was eerily calm. "There has been a mistake. This property is not for rent. It is a private residence. The listing is fraudulent." David frowned. "Oh, that is disappointing. It looked perfect for a commercial shoot I have coming up." "It is not a commercial space," I said. "It is my home." David nodded slowly. He looked at Mason, then back to me. He understood. He backed toward the door. "Right. I will just go. Sorry for the intrusion." He left quickly, shutting the door behind him with a definitive click. I stood there for a moment, staring at the wood of the door. Then I turned around. My father was standing in the middle of the room. He was looking at Mason. He was looking at his son as if he were seeing a stranger. "You listed the house?" my father asked. His voice was quiet, trembling. Mason did not answer. "Mason," my father shouted. It was a roar that made my mother jump. "You listed your sister's bedroom on the internet." Mason flinched. He backed up against the wall, his hands raised in a defensive posture. "I had to," he yelled back. "I needed the cash flow. The bank loan was taking too long, and I needed to buy more gear. It is just a room. Dad, it is empty all day while she is at work. Why shouldn't we monetize it?" "Monetize it," my father repeated. He looked sick. He looked like he wanted to vomit. "You brought strangers into her bedroom?" my father asked. "I did not let them in yet," Mason cried. "That guy was the first one. And anyway, I was going to supervise them. It is passive income." "Dad, you are always telling me to be smart with money. This is smart. This is leverage." My mother walked over to Mason. She looked like she was going to slap him, or maybe hug him. I couldn't tell. "Mason," she said, her voice shaking, "you told us you just needed a place to work. You didn't tell us you were renting it out." Mason threw his hands up. "Oh, so now you are against me too," he screamed. His face was red, contorted with the rage of a narcissist who has been caught. "Everyone is against me," he shouted. "Nora comes home and acts like a cop. The neighbors call the HOA. And now you guys are freaking out over a little listing. I am trying to build an empire here. I am trying to do something with my life." He pointed at me. "She has everything," he yelled. "She has the house, the car, the job. She doesn't even appreciate it. She is never here. Why can't I have a piece of it? I just need a chance. One chance. And you are all ruining it." He was crying now, angry, self-pitying tears. I stood by the kitchen island. I felt completely detached from his tantrum. It was like watching a bad actor in a play that had gone on too long. I looked at my watch. It was 8:15. I looked out the window. A car was pulling up to the curb. Not a van, not a sports car, a black sedan. Then another car behind it, a marked police cruiser, and a third car, a sedan with a municipal logo on the side. Simone had arrived, and she had brought the cavalry. I looked back at Mason, who was still ranting about how unfair the world was to his genius. "You want a chance?" I asked. Mason stopped shouting. He looked at me, his chest heaving. What he snapped. I walked over to the window and pulled the curtain back just enough for him to see the street. I pointed to the black car. I pointed to the police cruiser. I pointed to the woman in the sharp suit getting out of the sedan, holding a thick file of paperwork. I looked at my brother. You wanted an opportunity. Mason, I said softly. I heard the car doors slam outside. The sound was heavy. Final. Well, look outside, I said. Opportunity has arrived. The front door opened, and the air in the room changed instantly. It was no longer the stale, humid air of a family argument. It was the sterile, refrigerated air of consequence. 3 people walked into my living room. Leading the phalanx was Simone Parker. I had not seen her in 2 years. But she looked exactly the same, a woman carved out of granite and dressed in Italian wool. She held a black leather briefcase in one hand and a folded legal document in the other. Her eyes swept the room, taking in the displaced furniture, the scuffed floors, and the 3 people huddled by the kitchen island, categorizing everything as evidence. Behind her walked a man in a gray suit who looked like he had been born in a bank vault. He wore wire-rimmed glasses and carried a thick, sealed envelope. He did not look at the decor. He looked at Mason, and behind him was Kara Sloan, the blonde girl, the girl who had been sitting at my table an hour ago, typing furiously before fleeing in a panic. She was back, but she did not look panicked anymore. She looked angry. She was holding a tablet against her chest like a shield, and she refused to make eye contact with my brother. Mason took a step back, bumping into the kitchen counter. "What is this?" he stammered. "Who are these people?" Simone did not answer him. She walked straight to the dining table, the command center of their invasion, and set her briefcase down with a heavy thud. She turned to me. "Nora," she said, her voice cool and professional, "we are ready to proceed." I nodded. I looked at my family. My mother, Linda, was clutching her purse, her knuckles white. My father, Greg, looked like he was about to have a heart attack. Mason looked like a trapped rat, his eyes darting between the open door and the kitchen window. "This is Simone Parker," I said. "She is my attorney." I pointed to the man in the gray suit. "And this is Mr. Vance. He is a senior fraud investigator for the bank where you submitted your loan application." My mother let out a small, strangled squeak. "Fraud investigator," she whispered. "Why is he here?" We haven't even finished the application yet." Mr. Vance stepped forward. He placed the sealed envelope on the table. He did not sit down. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said. His voice was dry, devoid of any sympathy. "We received a digital application 14 days ago for a home equity line of credit secured against this property. The amount requested was $150,000. $150,000. My father's jaw dropped. He turned to Mason. "You said it was 10,000, he rasped. "You said you just needed 10,000 for equipment." Mason did not answer. He was staring at the floor, his face a mask of sweaty terror. "Mr. Vance continued, ignoring the interruption. "The application was flagged this morning by our internal audit system due to irregularities in the signature verification process. However, because the initial digital signatures were processed, the funds were scheduled to be released into a joint account tomorrow morning, pending a final physical inspection of the property to confirm occupancy." He opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of papers. "We were prepared to block the funds," he said, "but then we received a call from Ms. Miller alerting us to an active identity theft in progress." He looked at Mason. "Mason Caldwell," he said. "Did you or did you not submit this application using the digital identity of Nora Miller?" Mason licked his lips. I had permission. We talked about it." "It was a verbal contract." Kara stepped forward then. She slammed her tablet down on the table next to the investigator's papers. "Liar," she said. Mason flinched. "Kara, don't. You told me she signed it," Kara shouted. Her voice shook, but she held her ground. "You told me you had power of attorney. You made me upload those documents." She turned to me. "I am sorry." "Nora," she said, "I truly am. I worked with Mason on a crypto project last year. He told me he owned this house. He told me you were just a tenant who was moving out. He hired me to handle the administrative side of the loan because he said he was too creative for paperwork." She tapped the screen of her tablet. I started getting suspicious when I saw the deed was only in your name. When I asked him about it, he showed me a letter he said you wrote giving him full authorization. She looked at Mason with pure disgust. I ran the metadata on that letter this afternoon. She said, it was created in Photoshop. The signature was a copy-paste from an old insurance PDF. I was about to call the bank myself when I saw you walk in the door. My mother stepped forward, trembling. Okay, she said, her hands fluttering in the air. So there was a mix-up with the paperwork. Mason made a mistake. He is not good with details. We can withdraw the application. We can just cancel it. No harm done. Right. The money wasn't sent. She looked at Mr. Vance, flashing a desperate, wobbly smile. We will just cancel it, she repeated, and we will leave. No need for police. No need for investigations. Mr. Vance looked at her over the rim of his glasses. I am afraid it is not that simple. Mrs. Caldwell, he said, attempted bank fraud is a federal crime. But that is not the only issue here. He flipped to the second page of the document. The application was not just in Nora Miller's name, he said. Because the credit score associated with Mason Caldwell was insufficient, it is currently below 550 the loan required co-signers who were listed as co-residents of the property to guarantee the debt. He turned the paper around so my parents could see it. My father leaned in, squinting. Listed as co-signers, he asked. Mr. Vance pointed to 2 lines at the bottom of the page. Greg Caldwell and Linda Caldwell. He read, the signatures here are also digital. But according to the IP address log, they were authorized from a device registered to Mason Caldwell. The room went dead silent. My father looked at the paper. Then he looked at Mason. You used our names, my father whispered. Mason backed up until he hit the refrigerator. I had to, he cried. His voice was high and shrill. You guys have the pension. The algorithm wouldn't approve me without collateral. I was going to pay it back. I swear, the channel is going to blow up next month. I would have paid off the whole loan in a year. My father's face turned a color I had never seen before, a deep, bruised purple. You put our pension up as collateral, he roared. You put our house up. Not your house, Dad, Mason yelled back. Just your credit and your savings. It was a sure thing. My mother sank onto my sofa. She looked small and broken. We just thought we were helping you move in, she whispered. We thought we were just moving furniture. You told us Nora knew. You told us it was safe. She looked at me, her eyes filling with tears. Nora, she said, we didn't know. You have to believe me. We didn't know about the money. I looked at her. I believed that she didn't know about the money. But that did not absolve her. You didn't know about the loan, I said, but you knew about the invasion. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I opened the audio file I had saved from the security camera, the one labeled Evidence A. I tapped play. The sound of my mother's voice filled the room, tinny but unmistakable. Just move it all in. Stop worrying. She will not make a scene. The recording ended. I looked at my mother. You were willing to steamroll me. I said, you were willing to occupy my house, divert my mail, and gaslight me into submission. You didn't care if I was hurt. You only cared if I was loud. My mother covered her mouth with her hand. She could not look at me. She could not look at my father. She was stripped bare. Simone stepped forward. She placed a single sheet of paper on top of the fraud documents. This is a notice of trespass, she said. It informs you that your permission to be on this property is hereby revoked. You have exactly 15 minutes to remove your persons and your personal effects from the premises. She looked at Mason. If you are still here in 16 minutes, she said, I will instruct the officers outside to arrest you for criminal trespassing, and Mr. Vance will hand over his file to the FBI for the wire fraud investigation. Mason's eyes went wide. He looked at the paper. He looked at the open folder. Suddenly, he lunged. It was a desperate, stupid move. He threw himself at the table, his hands grabbing for the stack of papers, trying to tear them, trying to destroy the physical proof of his crime. No, he screamed. You can't do this, Mr. Vance did not flinch. He simply placed a heavy hand over the documents. But it was my father who stopped him. Greg Caldwell grabbed his son by the back of his shirt and yanked him backward with a force that sent Mason stumbling into the hallway. "Don't you touch that," my father shouted. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving. He looked at Mason with a mixture of heartbreak and fury that was painful to watch. "You used us," my father said. His voice broke. "We lied for you. We bullied your sister for you. We broke into this house for you. And you sold us out for $150,000. Mason straightened his shirt. He looked at his father, and for the first time, the mask of the victim slipped completely. There was no charm left, no pity, just the ugly selfishness of a man who had never been told no. "You owe me," Mason spat. "You made me this way. You always told me I was special. You always told me I deserved more. Well, I took more." My father stared at him. Then, slowly, he shook his head. "We didn't make you special, Mason," he said quietly. "We made you a thief." My father turned to me. He looked older than I had ever seen him. He looked like a man whose entire world had just dissolved. "I am sorry." "Nora," he whispered. I looked at him. I felt a pang of sadness, but it was distant, like looking at an old photograph of someone who had died a long time ago. "I know, Dad," I said, "but sorry does not fix the lock." I pointed to the door. "Go." My father nodded. He walked over to my mother and took her arm. She stood up shakily. She looked at me one last time, her eyes pleading for some sign of forgiveness, some hint that we could go back to the way things were. I gave her nothing. I stood like a stone. She lowered her head and walked out the door. Mason was the last to leave. He stood in the hallway, looking at the equipment he had dragged in, the empire he had tried to build on my foundation. "My gear," he muttered. "I can't carry it all. The curb." I said, "Put it on the curb. If it is still on my property in 15 minutes, the junk haulers take it tomorrow." He glared at me with pure hatred. "You are going to die alone in this big house." "Nora," he said. I smiled. "Better alone than with you," I said. He grabbed his ring light and his tripod and marched out the door. Simone followed them to the porch to ensure they cleared the driveway. Kara gathered her tablet and gave me a quick, shy nod before slipping out behind them. "Mr. Vance put the documents back in his envelope. I will need you to come to the branch tomorrow to sign the affidavit of forgery." "Mr. Vance said, "But for now, the account is frozen. You are safe. Thank you," I said. He nodded and left. I stood alone in the living room. It was quiet. The air conditioning hummed. The neon Vibes sign was gone. Mason had snatched it on his way out. I walked to the open door. My parents were getting into their minivan. They were not speaking. Mason was shoving his equipment into the back of the white van, cursing loudly. A truck pulled up to the curb. On the side, it said City Locksmith. The driver hopped out, holding a drill and a toolbox. He looked at the chaotic scene in the driveway, then up at me standing in the doorway in my trench coat. "You call for a rekey?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes," I said, "all exterior doors. And I need deadbolts installed on the interior garage door too." He whistled, locking it down tight. "Huh." I looked at the minivan pulling away. I watched the taillights disappear down the street. I watched the white van sputter to life and follow them, carrying away the parasite that had been feeding on my life for 3 decades. I looked at the locksmith. "Yes," I said, locking it out. I stepped back inside. I looked at my living room. It was messy. There were scuff marks on the floor. There was a hole in the wall where the backdrop had been mounted. It would take weeks to fix, but as I stood there, I took a deep breath. The air smelled like dust and old pizza rolls. But underneath that, it smelled like something else. It smelled like silence. I walked to the record player in the corner, the one they hadn't managed to move yet. I picked up a vinyl record, Beethoven's Symphony No. 7. The second movement, Allegretto. I placed the needle on the groove. The music started. Slow. Deliberate. Beautiful. I sat down on the floor, right in the center of the room, and I closed my eyes. My mother was wrong. I didn't make a scene. I just closed the door. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I have to ask, where are you listening from right now? Are you safe in your own space? Or are you dealing with your own family drama? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, and if you enjoyed seeing Nora take back her life, please subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button so we can get this story out to more people who need to hear it. Stay safe and check your locks.